If you are a beginner Spanish learner, should you be sticking exclusively with beginner materials and learning just the beginner grammar concepts? Is anything beyond that bound to frustrate you and just slow down your progress? Let's talk about it. So guys, recently in the Language Leaders Inner Circle, which is our private community for the members of my Framework to Fluency program, I received this really awesome question. Now we have really good discussions in the group all of the time, but there was just something about this question that made me want to share it with all of you. So to sum up this question, one of our members who categorizes herself as a beginner Spanish learner said that recently she'd really been thinking about the topic of personalizing your learning. She'd seen some of my videos on that topic. She'd also been watching some of my recent grammar videos, for example, on the pronoun se and about preterite and imperfect past tenses and all of those things. And she just really had the nudge, as she described it, to learn those things. And she talked to me a little bit about her current Spanish routine. She said that she listens to a lot of Spanish. She reads and writes something in Spanish every day, which is amazing. And let me tell you, she's not going to be a beginner for that much longer if she continues with that really awesome routine. But her question was, currently as a beginner, should I just jump into these topics? I really have the urge to do so. And it's not because I feel stuck or that I feel like something is missing. I just really think that it would boost my learning. Now, as I told her, I think that some of the best language learners really get curious about the language, and sometimes that curiosity takes them beyond where they're technically supposed to be. This is one of the reasons why I personally rather dislike trying to categorize everything, all Spanish materials, into beginner, intermediate, advanced categories, into A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, even though I recognize that has its place. It makes things more searchable. It helps learners know what to expect, and logically, some grammar topic should follow another. But the truth is that when I'm speaking to intermediate Spanish speakers, there are almost always some mistakes that they're making that we could categorize technically as beginner level mistakes, noun, adjective, gender agreement, things like that. So there's room to practice there. There's room to fill in some of those beginner gaps. And then on the other hand, I'll have beginners who just find a technically intermediate concept that I explained so helpful, and it just cleared up so much for them what they've been seeing when they're reading and listening. So the bottom line is that language is not completely linear, even though sometimes we would like for it to be. That's just not the reality of the situation. And when I read this question, I also started to think about my own experience in my beginnings with learning Spanish. And since I did learn Spanish outside of the traditional school system, and I was blissfully ignorant of how language is traditionally taught, I didn't have anyone, not even a voice inside of my own head, telling me to stay in my lane, don't do this yet because, that's a next year kind of a thing. I was exposed to a lot of Spanish at a lot of different levels. And I also had my beginner level material that I was working with at the same time. But something else that I was not doing was studying a lot of grammar explicitly. So when I do say that I was using materials that were even quite a bit above my level, what I'm really referring to is reading material, some of which I had in both languages. I had the opportunity to compare it with English, but what I don't mean is that I was investigating a lot of advanced grammar topics, because that's simply not where my focus was. So for you watching this video, you're probably much more informed than I was about different grammar concepts and different levels, supposedly, of Spanish. So should you bother to learn concepts that are above your level? And if so, how would I recommend doing that? Well, of course you can. But my number one piece of advice is that in order to learn these things effectively, what you really have to get into the habit of doing is simply being observant. I really try to emphasize that point, the need to start to notice patterns on your own to see when certain words change, when certain verbs change, for example. A lot of times you can kind of figure out why, at least a vague idea, or a theory at least of why those changes are happening and in what circumstances. For me, as a beginner, I would notice things about the language. I would start to notice patterns, not having a clue that I was noticing subjunctive patterns or starting to assimilate that there are two past tenses in Spanish. Never would I have known what those terms were called. I was completely unfamiliar with terms like subjunctive, preterite, imperfect. Those were things that I learned after having learned the language for the simple reason to be able to explain them to other people. But I'm really grateful for that opportunity to have had the chance to start to notice grammar on my own, especially because I wasn't a person who enjoyed studying grammar, not even in English. I loved the result, I guess you could say, of language. I loved reading. I was a complete bookworm, loved writing, stories, poetry, but studying grammar, that was not a part of school that I enjoyed at all, not even a little bit. So if I had tried to learn another language through grammar, not only would it not have been effective, but it also would not have been enjoyable to me. I really doubt I would have gotten very far. So when you are starting to notice things on your own, as you listen, as you read, how far you take your curiosity about the things that you discover really is going to be up to you. You could take a completely natural approach and kind of subconsciously file those patterns away and just wait for them to come back again and again until you have absorbed everything completely. Or you may be pairing your listening and reading with some explanation, some grammar explanations that are helping you more quickly be able to assimilate the concepts. And you may go so far as pausing what you're doing, going and looking something up, really diving deep and trying to understand this concept, even though it's beyond your beginner level, just because you are so curious about why it is the way it is. All of these ways are valid because we are different as human beings. And the truth is, some grammar explanation and practice kept in its proper place, never as the bulk of your learning, but just sprinkled in there with your listening and reading, can help to speed up your understanding and your ability to properly use the language. So to answer this question, should you stick with beginner materials? Should you stick to learning beginner grammar concepts as a beginner? The answer really is twofold. One, no, you certainly don't have to. There's a lot to be said about not really caring about how your grammar book, if you use one, categorizes things, and just taking the opportunity to look up those things that you specifically want to know right now and seeing if you can understand it, seeing if it makes sense for you. The worst thing that could happen is that you say, I'm not quite ready. I'll come back to this later. And there's nothing wrong with that. Or you may find yourself as a beginner being able to understand it perfectly well. But having said that, I would advise not spending too much time with the grammar explanations at all, be them beginner, intermediate, or advanced level. Simply because in order to truly effectively be able to understand and be able to communicate in the language, you're going to have to spend most of your time with your listening and with your reading, rather than spending most of your time having someone or having a book explain concepts to you. The truth is that if you're using material, comprehensible input, reading, listening, that has enough vocabulary in there that you can follow along, a lot of the grammar is going to start to fall into place for you naturally. And then when those explanations do come in, they're going to make so much more sense the more you have simply exposed yourself to Spanish. I really hope that was helpful to anyone who may have had a similar question. Of course, this is just one factor of many that goes into creating a really effective Spanish routine for yourself, especially if you're just starting out or if you've tried before and just kind of given up out of frustration. But it's not hard to put together a routine once you understand all of the pieces. So if you would like help so that you can know how to put together your insanely effective Spanish study routine, then I invite you to my free Framework to Fluency Masterclass. You can go to ericaraelanguage.com/masterclass or click on the link below. I'll see you guys there, but in the meantime, don't forget to go out and live your new language today. Bye-bye.